My name is Michael Strumsky, and this is my podcast, People More Interesting Than Me. Each episode, I'll interview a person with a different background to try to understand what circumstances, family, or tragedy has made them into the individual they are today. Enjoy.
Years ago, I'm like, it'd be because I wasn't able to keep up with friends very well. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
imagine you had a podcast where you just were able to talk to old friends and
Yeah,
figure out how they went in the 4 years since you last talked to them.
that's genius. You should do that. I like that.
But I feel like it's sort of what you've kind of gotten into because the majority of people you've known either via somebody or previously. And I'm like,
Yeah. So that's kind of like it. You would think the way I'm doing it, and I mean, we might as well just have started the podcast right now because no, I'm not even joking. I'm going to probably take what you just said as the first thing, and
yeah,
then this is just going to sound ironic,
yeah.
but it's just hard to find I don't know. I assume you know what this is. You know what the if the is I think it's called if then the whole women's month. They did a thing on the National Mall that had I think 30 like statues of women in orange resin. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, no.
No. So basically, they took like 30 women who are in STEM currently from all different fields, like mathematics, engineering, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I probably emailed like 25 of them because the good thing about it in like all their portfolios, they had like Instagram, they had their email and stuff like that. So I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm not even going to be able to, like, I'll have to find their Instagram. But it's even worse when you have their direct like Instagram in their email and they won't even contact you back. But like for some of them, I understood because I mean, like when I looked at their Instagram profiles, they were doing they might not had like the most amazing job, but they were doing conferences and like if you want to contact my marketing team or like that. But then I think one lady responded, so I kind of have an interview with her.
Nice.
But getting back to what you said, yeah. So basically, right now, only my friends are acquiescing to these interviews, but I like that you get the vibe that I'm just trying to reconnect to friends. So at, le-
That,
at least it's coming across like something like that.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I didn't know if there was further aspirations in that other than just reconnecting with people. But you forget when you haven't seen people in years, like how many different things and accomplishments they all of a sudden go. Like your last one, to go from jumping to like six different areas and jobs and stuff like Tesla. And I mean, it's just crazy, and you don't realize how interesting in some ways your friends are, which
yeah,
is. But
and it's funny because I mean, I am I don't know if it's my age or my brain, but like over the last like 5 years, when people ask me like what's up, I've like there's like so many things that are up, but I can never like tell people what I'm like currently into. Like I might have just had a baby or I just like moved into a house and I'm thinking more of like on a personal level, like I did start a new TV show, but they don't want to know about it. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
I self-reflect when I talk about myself because my wife asked me the other day, she was like, somebody asked me about Law, my son, the other day at school, and she was like, do you think they really care? And I'm like, you know they don't care, right? Because you should think like yourself. Like I wouldn't care. And I'm huge against small talk. So if anybody's listening to this who's my friend, they should already know I don't like small talk. So um but let me delay introduce you. I've got Ryan Michael Smith with me, and I know Ryan through a longtime family friend, um, Emily Dillon, who we went to church with together, and I did Boy Scouts with her brother for the longest time. But funny story because I know how Emily loves her how I know people stuff like that. But funny story how like I had always like run into Emily like just because I was like I think she was an altar server too at like church where they've got
yeah.
the black and white gowns like holding the candles and stuff like that and passing out the bread. Um but but I had never really like talked to her or like interacted with her at all. But we both like high school year, we went to CCD. Do you know what CCD is?
Yeah, I went through CCD as well. Yeah.
So so like seventh or eighth grade, like this was after confirmation. So this is basically like, equivalent to people, I don't know, going to class after like, I don't know, exams. You know what I mean? Like there's no point to going to CCD, people. CCD is like we mentioned, it's like Christian school after you go to regular school. And nobody nobody wants to be there. I'll just say that. And nobody wants to be there after confirmation, especially because there's no, like, the only thing after that is getting married or becoming a priest. Let's put that out there. So getting to Emily. So basically in these classes that you're not talking about confirmation, you're just talking about like world things. You're talking about like the church's opinion on abortion, on like poverty, and I don't even need to tell you, but like, Emily on like the poor, the destitute, and I really have no opinion on that just because I hate following the news. But when we were 17 and 18, Emily Dillon was like the person like in your AP classes who were asking about like the homework for the next day when the teacher didn't say anything about it. And she was the one like getting into like severe arguments on the peasants in the agrarian, you know what I mean? Like she would fight with the teacher in CCD, and I'm just sitting there waiting for the time to pass. And I was just like, I, she's a force to be reckoned with. That's all I gotta say. But I do love our interactions to death just because they're very unique and astounding. Because we've played a random D&D session together. I think maybe like 4 years ago, she came over to a house that I was staying out with a bunch of friends, and she was just there playing D&D, which fascinates me.
For all those reasons, that's why I married her. So it works out.
Yeah. Okay. Now this is all about you. So start me off. You're from Wisconsin, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. So where did it go from there? What was your family life like? So on and so forth.
Yeah. So from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, it's a small-ish town of like 10,000 or so people. Grew up in a family of four, two older siblings, and then a younger brother. Family was probably, I'd say we're middle class in terms of that regards, socioeconomic status wise. And my little brother was 5 years younger than me. My older siblings were like 6, 7 years older than I. So a little age gap between all of us for that. So I was definitively the middle child, I'd say, for that. And we were in terms of Wisconsin, not rural, but definitely not city, somewhere in between, not necessarily even suburbs, I'd say, but very little diversity, not much to speak of at all, comparatively speaking, now that I live here on the East Coast. High school was like 1,000 students total. I think my graduating class was like 200, which in retrospect to other people in that area was massive. We were one of the bigger high schools. So that kind of shaped a little bit of everything in terms of where we were from and what it set up, but definitely a different world in rural Wisconsin area than especially where I live now in the East Coast in Baltimore City. So that kind of led the way for whole lots of things. But overall, growing up, my parents were super supportive of everything, had great, siblings that were supportive of that. Got really involved into sports, specifically wrestling, and working lots of jobs, pizza cook, washing dishes, cardboard factories, Jimmy John's, all the things. Pretty sure I've had a hand in almost every job I can think of. And life was pretty good from all that, but decided to stay in Wisconsin for college with the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point to become an athletic trainer. And then that led me to grad school for physical therapy, which eventually led me over here to the East Coast for all that. So that's the quick nitty gritty of how all that turned out.
Speaking of, like you mentioned box factories, you worked at a cardboard factory. How was that?
Oh man, that was a summer of brutal physicality. I work, I do PT stuff in the employer space now. And man, I got my ass kicked or butt kicked, depending on if this is explicit or not.
Now I got to put it down as E. Thanks a lot. I only had one other episode, and that was the Hijacker episode.
There we go. Okay, well, that was necessary to have that.
Oh yeah, that is very true. But like, I can't even. Was it just cardboard that you were dealing with, or were you like? Because I would imagine you get in some hijinks because there's there's forklifts there, and B, like whenever cardboard is involved, since I know like my child's 1 year old, and everybody knows 1-year-olds love cardboard, but when you get older, it's just like what wrestling moves can I do with like 3 feet of cardboard like below me? You know what I mean?
No, it was essentially it's corrugated cardboard, but it was a summer college job that would be good back in my hometown. You just take these giant 8x10 sheets and try to pile up as many as you can on your forearms. You shovel them to a machine, and then it like cuts them out, puts the ink and stuff on it, and sends it out. That's how all the boxes get made essentially. And that was just what I do over and over and over and over again, or glue a bunch of things together. So it was good in the sense of it was a good summer job for that. It was like 100 degrees in the warehouse. You're putting all that in. Builds character, as my dad would say, for it. But really made me appreciate I did not want to do a physical labor job moving forward. From the sense of there's no way I could have done that for years. There was dudes in the line who were done it for like 30. And I'm like, I don't know how I can do it. I was beat up and brutal. But the funny thing of that is, ironically, you had earplugs in at all times, safety goggles. So you're kind of in your own world. And it was a really easy way just to like zone out for 8 hours and just repeatedly do things over and over and over and over and over again, which is pretty nuts. But yeah, it was a hell of an adventure for 4 or 5 months.
That sounds like my wife always, like, she's a teacher right now, and she's like, man, I would love a factory job, just doing the same thing like every day. And I'm like, you actually might like that, because she just likes to, like, she's got like a direct focus, unlike me, where I just go in like sporadic locations, like start a podcast, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, she would be like, I'm too tired to do that. But what I wanted to say is, talking to your brother, our dads sound very similar, but very different at the same time. And I think you've met my dad before, so you kind of know that he's very like salt of the earth type man. But your dad sounds much nicer, because from what your brother was telling me, like, your dad would, like, for example, on a Saturday morning, get up really early, right? But he wouldn't wake you guys up, correct?
Yeah.
But complete opposite.
Dad was the epitome of like Midwestern fatherhood style. The story is that, like, when it was just my brother and I, my little brother and I at home, my older siblings had gone to college. He got tired of, I think, just yelling at us to go help him shovel in the mornings when all the snow was there. So eventually he just stopped. And what he would do was go outside and start shoveling at like 5 in the morning. He knew that we could hear him shoveling. And whether he consciously knew this or not, the guilt and disappointment we felt in not helping our dad do a chore in the morning in which he expected us to was way worse than him telling us to get up and go help him. And that's when I realized how much Catholic guilt I carry with me over that. When my dad's out there shoveling, you hear the first scrape, and you're like, oh, you're out of bed in 2 seconds and jolting out there. So whether he intended that or not, that was always the way to get us out there and start helping with chores. Otherwise, Dad's probably one of the quietest guys I know. Very timid and not incredibly outspoken, but when he does, he thinks a lot about what's he going to say before he does. And so he kind of did that all growing up from it. The same way with the shoveling piece, like, realized he didn't need to say a whole lot of things. His actions spoke louder than his words. And that in turn probably shaped a lot of what my little brother and I do for our work ethics overall. Is just don't say much, go to work, get it done, and think about it later.
Yeah. So when I said our dads are similar, the only thing similar is hard workers, because my dad would have. And it's the same in the same scenario that you were talking about with the shovel. Like, the funny thing is, like, you'd never heard so much gravel on the pavement too. Like, where did that gravel come from? Like, I don't remember any gravel on our like asphalt, but when you're shoveling it, it sounds like he's just picking up like rocks. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know if they did that on purpose or it was just the guilt, because I had that too. It was like, my dad would be And it wasn't just like that. Like you said, like it would be like anything, mowing the lawn, like making Home Depot runs. Like that was like the worst part of my childhood was like Home Depot runs. But because who wants to go to Home Depot on the weekend? Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, I know that sounds bratty, but it's funny. Our generation, I know we don't, it's just like our parents and their brothers and sisters say, like, we don't know how good we have it.
Yeah.
And and that goes to what you're saying. Like you saw your dad on how hard he worked, and I saw my dad on how hard he worked. And I mean, my parents pushed me to. I mean, they didn't push me to become an engineer, but they definitely pushed me towards college. And I
Mhm.
think it's like a lot of our parents our age, they pushed us to college so that we didn't have to do blue collar, like tough jobs where they came home and they didn't want to do anything else. You know what I mean? Whereas like
For
peop
sure.
yeah, where people our days, they look for that side hustle because maybe they're working like a light job where they have enough strength and energy and I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, my mom's parents both worked at Oscar Mayer in a factory for like 30 or 40 years while working a farm. And I mean, they were just on the line all the time. And I'm sure my dad's parents were a little bit different in terms of their jobs, but yeah, I talked to him about that consistently of the expectations their parents had for them and then they had for us is very different. And now that we're in this world of one, looking back on was college the right move for all of us, millennials and Gen Xers, period. Now that how much it costs. And everybody's like, why did we push all these kids to college so quickly and at a price point that's absurd for some degrees? And my dad's like, if I would have known that, I would just had you go do a trade job or something like it. But at
Which
the time, no, at the time I was like, Dad, I'm gonna make enough money someday. I'm just gonna pay somebody to fix the sink, right? Like that's my goal. And here, my brothers and I are now YouTubing everything and buying saws and ratchet sets and new screwdrivers, and that's what Christmas. And we're all now we all do this stuff, and we're like, oh, if we would have just paid attention a little more when we were like 15, I might actually know how to find a stud on the wall a little bit better. Like
yeah.
stick to those shit.
So where are you today? We talked about kind of like your upbringing through your parents and stuff like that. And I did mention your physical therapist. Technically, you're a doctor as well, right? A doctor of physical therapy. That's the correct term, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, what made you leave Wisconsin to go? What's the technical term for the major you got?
So I got a major in athletic training for undergrad. So you get licensed as an athletic trainer, then you also get a degree and Bachelor of Science in athletic training. Um, and then, yeah, I went right from that. I graduated May of something 2013, and then I started PT school June of 2013. So, and I did that over at Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. The impetus to leave to Wisconsin was not like this you rah rah of like, oh, I hate it home. I need to get away from it. Like I've always sort of loved Wisconsin, and I didn't necessarily need to leave. But it came down to talking to my staff advisors at Stevens Point, and they're like, if you have the chance to go to massive D1 school and go get an education, do it. Little did I know out of state tuition would be like $75K a year. In hindsight, I might have changed that result knowing
Yeah.
that. But overall, from where I'm at now, it was the perfect decision. But it was mainly because I didn't get accepted to Wisconsin or Minnesota for PT school, which is my top two. It was between Milwaukee University or University of Wisconsin Milwaukee and Ohio State. And so, the cloud of Ohio State, checking out the campus, like it was pretty perfect. So my dad drove me down to see the university quick on a visit, and I loved it. It was the first time I had driven into a city that had like a skyline. I thought like Milwaukee doesn't really have that, neither like not really, and Columbus kind of does. We're like, wow, this place is huge, and it's Columbus, Ohio, and now I live in Baltimore and DC. And you're like, oh, those are what cities are like. So that was sort of the impetus to get out to PT school for there, and then got my doctorate of physical therapy through that time period a little bit. Which was a significant chapter of life that I thought was a decade long, and it only ended up being like 3 to 5 years or something. But
so now I understand why Emily is so gung ho on this relieving student debt.
yes, because now it is. Well, it's not hers. If I died or whatever, she wouldn't have to take it on, but definitely affects our financial decisions. But it, the debt thing is it's a reckoning for everybody. And I have no idea what the right solution is, whether it's forgiven or not. Like the current solution, because I have so much, no matter, unless Emily and I were to make like tons and tons of money, the amount we pay towards it a month can never actually outkick the interest that is accruing on it.
So you have to do the 10 years.
Well, yeah, it's 25 years and then they forgive it, but you get 30% taxed on whatever that amount is at the end of that 25 years. So you have to put money away elsewhere in some sort of investment thing, enough to be able to cover that 30% tax. Otherwise, you go back into basically repaying the federal payment.
Look out. I've got the solution for you guys. Just move to Europe and never come back.
Never come back. Yeah.
I mean, that's the only smart solution I've really, well, obviously besides saying the debt to get away, but that seems like a lot harder than just a flight to Brussels. So you moved, so after college, this is the biggest part that I thought was very interesting that kind of caught me was you started your own business. So what made you get to that point? And then kind of explain what the business is, I guess.
Yeah. So the business, probably the seeds of that were probably in grad school or at Ohio State. So when I first got to PT school, I knew I wanted to do orthopedic sports stuff, I think, as every PT, a lot of PTs do when they first get there. It's a lot of motivation for people, even though there's neuro and other things for that. But I'll say, I knew pretty quickly within like a year and a half or so that I wanted to kind of start doing my own thing. And also that I was a little bit, I felt quite rebellious to the standard that PTs were learning. Like we kept doing these things that just didn't seem like they really helped or didn't work, or like there was all these other cool classes that I could take outside of school that I would learn all these stuff and these new theories and things, and just felt like there was a lot missing from the school curriculum. So I was already kind of like, I want to do this or that and try that and do my own thing, and really spur there. And then on top of that layer of wanting to seek other truths at how you can practice as a PT, I wasn't doing great in PT school. It's probably the first time in my life that I wasn't doing, like, school wasn't easy. So that in itself was a little rough. But so, and most of that was because I wanted to do my clinical rotations the way I wanted, instead of learning from, you go off to a clinic, you're assigned to a person who's your advisor. They walk you through things and you treat the patients with them. I had 2 separate clinicals that I almost failed because I did not do well with the clinical advisor I was with.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just felt like there's a better way to do this in terms of how we talk about pain, in terms of how we do strength training. Like, I think this is what I was right. And you know, in hindsight, I was definitely like the student that none of these advisors wanted to have, who just was sort of opinionated, wanted to do their own thing, wouldn't just do it by the book. I'm like, man, I would hate, if I was my own advisor back then, I would have hated having me as a student. So between like almost failing both rotations and a couple of my classes that were really difficult, I was just automatically this sort of in a position of like, I need to do things differently. And I feel like I have the skill set to do that. Here's these things. How do I go about doing that? And that was basically the impetus to open up my own practice right when I graduated from PT school. So those kind of things all play together in terms of the difficulty of school, my clinical rotations, I wanting to seek knowledge and education elsewhere. And then on top of all that, grad school ended up probably being the first time that I sort of understood what mental health was and what depression was. You talk to anybody from the Midwest, like the general stereotype is we just bury our feelings deep down inside. Like, yeah, that's nice, right? The hopes and like, oh, it's fine. There's definitely some truth to that. But in grad school, I hit such a low of depression that I really didn't identify or understand what it was. That, that on top of the school being rough was just really bottomed out for a host of things. So I had to seek some help and didn't quite realize what that meant at the time. But that plus the school plus the education and me wanting to do my own thing, that was kind of all this like crazy events that came together and said, all right, I'm just going to open up my own business right when I graduate. So I did. I opened up my own quote unquote clinic, which basically just means you treat privately as a cash-based PT, meaning people just pay you not necessarily via insurance, but sort of like a personal trainer type of stuff in terms of the transaction. I was doing that out of a CrossFit gym and a strength conditioning gym. And at the same time, while I was kind of seeing some patients, I was bartending and managing a bar probably 2 to 4 days a week. So between those things, that's how I basically made ends meet for about a year before I moved over out to Maryland to start a business with some partners.
Right. You're working 2 jobs and taking not classes, but you were getting your hours, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, because I kind of started I couldn't treat patients in PT school like on the side.
Yeah.
But like starting to use my students and just people at the CrossFit gym and just playing around with stuff. But then, yeah, during PT school, I was bartending all the time and just trying to save up money. Then when I graduated, I was bartending and being a PT.
Did you have any free time?
A lot, actually. I mean, kind of, sort of not. Because when you open up your own business right after you go to school, it's not like there's just patients at your door. Like I probably saw a handful a month for the first few months. So I was like working late nights at the bar, making a ton of money bartending. And I almost went to the full restaurant route. I almost made a complete 360 and threw my degree away because I'm like, I could do the bartending thing and manage a restaurant. But yeah, that was like a year-ish of that. I'm just making ends meet at the bar and then trying to like, what does it mean to establish a practice as a physical therapist and get patients and treat people and make it a viable business, which in hindsight, I had zero idea how to do any of that. And was just kind of winging it as I went. And that's why I took the opportunity to join kind of a partnership out in Maryland from all that.
And so how did the partnership go? This is Gene, right?
Yeah.
Who we were talking about earlier.
Yep. Yeah. Who has his own podcast. You should hear that episode on. So him and kind of met up with him and Ben through some mentorship programs in PT school. Some of the ways I was trying to find other education and stuff. So we had known each other through that. And he had got some funding and wanted to kind of start up a own clinic gym practice sort of thing. And then met up with him and decided that was the right thing to do because I wanted to do something similar. I didn't have any funding or I didn't know how to like expedite that process. So he's like, basically, if you just move out to Maryland, we can start it, XYZ timeframe. And I said, okay.
Where were you living prior, I guess?
With a couple friends.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were the kindest people ever. I actually was their minister at their wedding. Is that what it's called? Minister, the people.
Priest, minister. Oh, officiant.
There we go. Officiant.
Yeah.
So they were incredibly kind to let me live with them for really cheap rent during that time period. And so I didn't really own much of anything. So I threw everything in at the time was this old Buick. And I moved everything down in just a Buick to Maryland. Got an Airbnb for 4 weeks until I could find a place for an apartment. I had a little bit of money saved up to be able to do that until we could open up the actual clinic and start like somewhat paying myself.
That was cardboard money, right?
It was cardboard money. Yes, exactly. And whatever could stick at the Airbnb. Fair.
And with that, I mean, like we were talking about before, I know it's not the same with DIY, but from my experience, just like getting into something and diving in the deep end, it's so hard, but at the same time, you pick up stuff that, like, for example, if you're going to start another business down the line, you kind of know, I mean, you've already cracked a few eggs and it's not going to be as difficult. And you'll kind of know what I need to spend money on, what the shortcuts are. Like, for example, working at the company I've worked at, what I've realized is you can kind of tell what an employee is like in the first week that you employ them, especially if it's a small company. You kind of like, you get their skills, what they're like as a person, and then their work ethic. You know what I mean? And like you did, like, I don't know if I could ever start a business, but that's why I started a podcast.
Which could one day be a business. It's
yes, years down the line when I'm at episode 300, and then what's that? Sponsored by Dippin' Dots. We're here. Wow. It's no longer ice cream of the future. It's the future now.
That's the sponsorship. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's better ice cream by then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's awesome. It's just like, that's the best time to learn is when you've got like skin in the game. You know what I mean? Like you're actually grinding it out. So like all of these moves you've made are kind of lined up with the Enneagram test you took with the type 3, which a lot of people I interview are type 3s, which I don't know how that works out, or maybe only type 3s will say yes to me for interviews. But are self-assured, attractive, charming, ambitious, competent, and energetic. Wait, here come the negative traits. They can also be status conscious and highly driven for advancement. Do you kind of see maybe just the first traits, at least, like the attractive, charming, ambitious type adjectives? I know Emily does.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I don't yeah, when I took that, I think I was close to a couple there of like 3, 8, 9 or something like that. But it's funny because as I'll get more into the story for that, like the high advancement stuff, I've really tried to figure out and look very consciously and transparently, like, why did I end up wanting to start a business like that? Like, what was the true motivation and driver? Because I had all those things that came together to do it. But yeah, I think I really just wanted recognition for a lot of things. Like, I wanted people to know that I'd work hard and I could do that and I could build something, and that I wanted control over all that and say, this is mine. Here's what I've created. This is what it could be. Um, that's kind of what I've always wanted, I think, for lots of things. And in retrospect, like, you can't go into a business, I think, with that mindset of either wanting control or recognition to some degree over those things. Because you don't always have control and you won't always get recognized. And nobody really sees all the things that you need to really learn along the way and really confront about yourself when you're trying to either hire people, convince other people to work with you, to grow as a team, to build a community, like all these things that you kind of struggle and work through. In the meantime, how do you progress yourself personally to get the things that you want at the same time? And it's difficult when I think you're going through that. And all that is to say, I think I summarized it of like, I think I was just a bit selfish trying to start a business like that, in hindsight, without really understanding what my true motivations were and what that meant to do to start and build a business from it, especially from scratch. Like, I was probably doing it because I didn't want to do what the status quo for healthcare for PT was.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted recognition, like I said, for that. I'm like, cool. Well, I'm just going to do my own thing and figure it out later because I want control over that. And very quickly, if you ever end up employing a bunch of people in your podcast business at some point, you don't always have control, and you have to figure out what that means and how to be a leader. And going through business ownership has really redefined of what I think it means to lead and kind of where I'm at now. But additionally, like, it's one of the harder things I've done. And ultimately at a point now where I'm not in the business anymore, and doing something completely different, because a lot of the things I've learned from that aspect as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
So I guess in this process of the business, and even going out to the East Coast, I know that you said that you had some trouble at one point where, like you said, the case of the grumpies, that's kind of what it was in my dad's, era. There was no such thing as depression or anything like that. It was kind of like buck up and like get your boots on, basically.
Yeah.
Well, was there any moments that I guess that anybody like was helpful at those moments, or kind of like helped you push on, or the exact opposite, that was kind of not holding you back, but kind of not supporting your choices?
Yeah, there was, ironically, in PT school, 2 women who were my advisors on my last clinical rotation, that was a little bit specialized in business, were 2 of like the champions and people who really saw a lot of potential in me and thought I could do great things, and it really supported me in a host of ways, and elevated me to start my own business, to give it a shot, to try all those things, and helped me a ton with overall pain that I was having, in addition to sort of depression and mental health issues. Like, they were very transparent and wanted to confront those things in a student that they didn't have to. And it was a really great environment to be a part of and understand like what it meant to really be cared for in terms of an advisor and somebody who you're working under, and those types of things. And they, without that, I don't know if I would have ever really been on the uptick and upshot to get out of that grad school depression type of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was huge for me in terms of the business. Like nobody in PT ever thinks your business is going to work. I went to multiple conferences in which they didn't think the model was going to work and these things and that stuff. So there's always a ton of motivation, people who are naysayers when you're trying to do that. Even, when friends, I think that's the hardest part when you're trying to explain to family and friends, like, what do you do? Like, well, I kind of do this business thing where we, do this or that. And it's the hardest thing because you always are looking for that like facial
reaction. Yeah.
reaction. Like, do they actually think you're full of shit or not? Or like, what does this actually mean? Versus like when you tell people I have a job, I have a salary, it's so much an easier conversation.
That's why small talk is the
way. It goes back to what you're saying before. Like it's easier to say, yep, got a stable job. We're doing this. Like we're checking off the boxes versus like, actually, like I barely make above poverty guidelines and I'm struggling to figure out how we're going to run this thing for the next 3 years.
That's even worse. That'll just mean like they need to like develop an emotional reaction that they didn't know they had to at a birthday for a 1-year-old or something like that.
Yes, exactly. Well, I've had a good amount of people who have elevated me and I think helped in that sense. And, surprising, most of them are women. And when I look back and reflect on it, who have just been able to, lend me great advice, support me throughout it, and encourage me to look at more than just, what am I producing or this type of stuff, and how am I taking care of myself and those things. Emily, obviously, my wife being the largest component of that. The funny story there is we first started dating. I told her that I had beat depression and like, yeah, I've taken care of this. Like, don't worry about it. Like I already took care of that in grad school. Why can't you do the same thing with like, anything that you might be going through? And in hindsight, what an idiot I was. But also I've now understand like, how does depression, look like for me? When do the ebbs and flows occur? Who am I during those times? And really trying to address that as a major, point of a relationship or a marriage.
Yeah. So you had mentioned that you're out of the business now, and do you have any moves currently 5 years down the line? Like, do you have your eyes on something?
Yeah. So this ironically timed podcast is like I'm doing my first steps to get back into PT. So I took what I labeled as a sabbatical in which I still had a job, but it had nothing to do with healthcare or physical therapy. I'm a operations manager at a creative agency. So I took some of the business stuff I learned and project things and operations and got a job at an agency to be able to do that. But
so you're basically like John Hamm in Mad Men, right? That's what I'm imagining right now? Exactly.
All I really do is smoke cigars and drink whiskey all day at the office.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that? 60s? So ironically right now I'm starting to dip my toe back into PT water. I'm getting involved with a company who does physical therapy, coaching, and wellness in a really unique way, direct to employers. And, I have a host of thoughts on how healthcare can improve and but the biggest part is meeting people where they're at, which is at work, right? Most people's health things, when you boil down to it's work related. And if you can get to people there, start planting seeds how to improve your health, and also show employers that your people are stronger, happier, and healthier. Like that's where it's at. It's just really hard to show employers what to do. Luckily, this company has done that for a long time and is slowly gaining traction and building more. So I'm doing a little bit there. Eventually, we'll probably go back to PT with them or with someone in some regards full time, and move on from the 5 years of what I did with the business itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I guess what I wanted to say to follow up with that, when you get a new client, and this is kind of touching on, I guess, not just your business, but the profession. When you start off with a new client, I guess, how do you approach it? Do you take it off like, what do you want to achieve? Or do you kind of take it from their attitude? Like, obviously, I feel like the mental aspect is the body will follow the mind. You know what I mean? The way you handle it when you see a new client.
Yeah, I'd say to me, movement's a window into people's health. You can tell a lot about someone and what they're doing when they're moving. But ultimately, I think it comes down to I forget what the exact diagram or term for it, but essentially the stages of change of where they're at in terms of their pre-contemplation, contemplation phase, all that stuff. from working for people like in a CrossFit gym to actual healthcare to the employer side, it does relate somewhat to the mind of, what is this person willing to be at? And for you as a healthcare provider, I think you're just trying to figure out, how do I plant the appropriate seeds or help this person wherever they're at in their journey, right? Because we're dealing with things like chronic pain and injury and things along those lines. The ramifications of that in that person's life are massive. You're trying to figure out, what am I going to do with this person in where they're at the moment, what will be the most helpful for them. I like to do that through movement as much as I can, in terms of, show me what you're moving, and when you're moving, what do you feel when you move, and how is that related to your pain? Because if you can help people improve their overall health literacy and kind of understand where they're at with what they feel when they move, it can go a long way. But when I talk about pain like that to people, they can also be like, "Oh, you're just telling me it's all in my head. Screw you. I'm going to go elsewhere and get my back cracked, and I'll feel better that way," or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a really fine line between what we know about pain, where it's going, what we know about social determinants of health, and how you figure out what that person in front of you has, and how you create sort of a positive approach to move them along. But it really comes down to where they're at in that stage of change. What do they have going on in their life, and what are you really trying to do with that person? And sometimes less is better in most cases, I'd say.
Yeah. And the other good thing I like to hear is people like changing their perspective and adapting. Your brother Tony was telling me that you took some, I think you said not prenatal, postnatal courses for like women who, after having a baby, and it opened your eyes kind of, I guess, how to help them.
Yeah, the two women I talked about, who I did my last clinical rotation with, they had a pelvic health, women's health clinic. And I did that because I really wanted to get into their business, understand how it worked, but also, selfishly from a business perspective, women's health and pelvic health is a huge growing area of revenue and expansion and need for women across. And we continue to see that pelvic physical therapy for women is incredibly helpful and works well. So for all those business and also clinical reasons, it was great. But yeah, I took a lot of postpartum courses to just understand, like, how can I help women who are, postpartum, who are trying to get back into fitness, and work with them, and say appropriate things, right? Because most of us dudes have zero idea what that experience is like. I know you have a kid and you've seen your wife go through a host of things, but it's amazing when you can speak the language that a woman is experiencing and what they understand, and they sense that and understand that you do get that. Because when they do, that's just a different level of buy-in and trust. And now I get to ask these, questions about that, and really intimate questions, right? When you're talking about, like, hey, your pelvic floor, and, are you having constipation issues, incontinence issues? Like, are you bleeding? Like, all these things are really tough questions. And you need to be able to ask them and talk to them very straightforward about it, and have a level of empathy that you otherwise might not. So the postpartum class is just allowed for me to, for lack of better words, just speak to women. Maybe I was never good at that in the first place, and so this postpartum classes helped me get there. That's what Emily says, anyways. But yeah, because to me, it just makes also business sense. If you can't help those, women in those cases, you're eliminating 50% of the population that you're trying to work with from a business. And then you're just going to work with a bunch of dudes all the time. No offense, but that doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, I mean, also, no dude probably wants to work on their pelvic floor.
Yeah, which ironically, there's a lot of male pelvic health issues out there too. Yeah, like a quick segue. That's part of that depression and pain that I had in grad school was I was deadlifting a boatload of weight, had a back pain injury that actually led to incontinence issues for myself as a dude, which as a like 23, 4-year-old guy, you're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And that was sort of the impetus to get involved into the pelvic health route, was through my own understanding of struggles of, like, why am I having these issues, and what is going on here, and who do I seek for help, and how many obstacles are there of even talking about and having honest conversations about it.
One of my favorite questions: what is something that your parents did that you would like to pass on to your children? And what is something that you are trying to avoid, what your parents did?
My parents were amazing at supporting me without getting involved at a high degree, right? There's stereotypes of like the helicopter parents and stuff like that. I was really, really involved in wrestling in high school. Did all the things. My parents would wake up at 6 a.m. on Saturdays, drive me 3 hours to a tournament, let me sleep in the car the whole time, watch me wrestle, drive me all back 3 hours, all those things that we were expected. But most importantly, they didn't really understand the sport when they first got in. And so they would just sit there and watch. And they would always say, "We're so proud of you. We're so happy for you." But I knew they didn't really know what was going on for the longest time. And I also know that when they finally did figure it out and got excited about what was happening, they were still relatively reserved about it. And were just happy to see me, work at something. Um, and I never felt any sort of pressure from them on any degree, from, my athletics to other stuff in that regards. They were just quietly supportive all the time, I guess is the best way to put it. And I for sure want to do that for my kids. Like, I feel like I'm a very confident person, and I think they instilled that in me without ever having to, drive me to do something, by just saying, "We're proud of you. We love you. We'll support you doing this stuff." And like, if I can recreate even like 1% of that and what they instilled, I'll be happy for it. In terms of avoiding things, I think it's the Midwest thing, even as much as it is my parents. I think they struggled a lot to have very honest and deeper conversations about emotions, feelings, issues in the family, health, stuff like that. And they are more, I think, as they get older now, and being able to talk about certain things. But it isn't easy, and they never really prepared those types of conversations or able to have them very well. And I think I want to be able to do that with my kids. Maybe the postpartum courses that I took are a step towards that. When you can talk about health and those things, it makes it easier to talk about anything else. And that's probably the one thing I'd probably try to change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for making time. I know you had to fit me into your busy schedule today with mentoring, and you didn't actually end up helping somebody move, right? You said that got delayed.
No, the move we ended up doing, yes, the mentorship thing is separate. That'll be starting probably tomorrow or the next week. Yeah. Good.
Good for you. I wish, I can just do something like that, but I think I'm more of a soup kitchen person. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I could see myself with a ladle. I really don't think I'm a good role model, just because I don't know.
I don't know. Once we get to podcast episode 300, yourself could change.
Or it might get darker. You never know.
Yes, who knows?
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And I'm very thankful for Emily for hooking this up. So thank you, Emily, as well. But yeah, thank you, sir.
No problem. Appreciate it.
Have a good day. If you like this week's episode of People More Interesting Than Me, please follow me on Apple Podcasts so you won't miss out on more episodes like these.